History books say the British developed India, but development does not begin with famine and end with poverty. The truth is far darker and carefully hidden. The relationship between Britain and India was not trade. It was extraction on a scale the world had never seen. For 200 years, wealth streamed out of India like blood from an open wound, not through war alone, but through economics, through taxes, monopolies, forced crops, and engineered dependency, through a system designed to extract value and leave behind emptiness. The British Empire did not rule India. It harvested India. And behind this system was a number that sounds impossible. Over $45 trillion drained from one of Earth's richest civilizations. Money that built London, Manchester, railways, factories, and aristocracies. Wealth that turned Britain into a superpower and left India in forced poverty. This is not the story taught in textbooks. It is the real economic blueprint of empire. A blueprint that still shapes global power today. Because the past didn't end, it transformed. Before the British arrived, India wasn't developing. It was already one of the world's richest economies. India contributed nearly a quarter of global GDP. Its cities rivaled European capitals in wealth and complexity. Indian textile exports dominated world markets. Indian steel, wood steel, had no equal. Agriculture was abundant and diverse. Skilled artisans produced goods coveted across continents. Trade networks connected India to Africa, Arabia, and Southeast Asia. Poverty existed, but not as a norm, as an exception. Wealth circulated locally, productivity thrived. Local industries were protected and self-sustaining. India did not need saving, it needed protection from what came next. The British did not come to uplift India, they came to redirect its wealth. They came with traders, not soldiers. But the goal was conquest, not cooperation. And the method was economics, not war. The richest region on Earth had just become a target. The British East India Company arrived politely. They smiled, bowed, offered gifts, and requested trade privileges. Indian rulers saw them as merchants, not threats. Permission was granted, a fatal mistake. The company mapped ports, resources, and political fractures. They learned which rulers were insecure, which ministers were corruptible, which nobles could be bribed or blackmailed. They inserted themselves into local disputes, funded rebellions when profitable, brokered peace only to break it later. Every treaty shifted power toward the company. Every trade agreement weakened Indian autonomy. They did not conquer kingdoms, they hollowed them out. The company acted like a parasite disguised as a guest, and its influence spread silently. While Indian rulers argued among themselves, the company built a foundation for takeover. This wasn't diplomacy, it was the quiet beginning of corporate empire. A trading company should not have an army. But by the 1700s, the company commanded over 260,000 troops, more soldiers than most global empires. And the strange part, most of these soldiers were Indians, men trained, paid, and used to conquer their own people. They were called sepoys. The company understood something profound. If you control the salaries, you control the swords. No need for invasion, just payroll. With this army, they enforced treaties, seized territories, collected taxes, enforced monopolies. They privatized war. They industrialized conquest. A corporate board in London commanded an army a continent away. Shareholders funded battles for profits, not principles. This wasn't military occupation, it was militarized capitalism. In 1757, a single event changed India forever. The Battle of Plassey, often described as a military victory. But it wasn't a battle in the traditional sense, it was a corporate coup. The company bribed Mir Jafar, a key commander, promised him power in exchange for betrayal. During the battle, his troops stood still. The Nawab of Bengal fought alone, abandoned from within. The company barely lifted a sword. Corruption was the real weapon. After the victory, Mir Jafar was crowned. But he ruled nothing, he obeyed everything. Bengal, the richest region in India, fell into company hands. Its treasury was looted, its economy redirected to London. This one event funded the company's expansion. A corporation had captured a nation through bribery. and the age of extraction began. Plassey wasn't a battle, it was a hostile takeover. Once in power, the company redesigned Bengal's economy, not to strengthen it, but to bleed it. Taxes were increased beyond what people could survive. Local industries were dismantled, farmers were forced to grow cash crops, not food. Textiles were bought at artificially low prices, then sold in Britain at massive profits. Indian textile workers starved as British mills flourished. The wealth didn't circulate within India, it was extracted, funneled into Britain. Entire communities became impoverished. The company grew richer than European monarchies. India grew weaker than ever before. This wasn't economics, it was engineered poverty. A system designed for Britain to rise and India to fall. The drain became institutionalized, and it would continue for nearly 2 centuries until India was unrecognizable. In 1770, Bengal was hit by a famine that killed over 10 million people. But this was not a natural disaster, it was a corporate crime. Farmers had been forced to grow indigo and opium instead of food. Grain stocks were taxed and exported during the famine. Markets stayed open, but prices were unreachable. Food existed, but only for those who could pay. The starving were left to die on the roads. Villages collapsed into silence, bodies rotted in fields that once produced abundance, and the company still declared record profits. Shareholder dividends increased during the famine. Millions died while ledgers balanced perfectly. This was economic violence, hunger weaponized, death treated as acceptable business loss. No one was punished, no apology was ever issued. A corporation had orchestrated one of history's deadliest famines, and the world moved on. After Bengal, the company expanded the opium industry. Indian farmers were forced, at gunpoint, to grow opium. They were paid almost nothing. The opium was shipped to China, addicts multiplied by the millions. China begged Britain to stop. Britain instead launched the Opium Wars. The purpose wasn't only drug trade, it was financial warfare. Silver flowed from China into British hands, and from Britain straight into the empire machine. India produced the drug. China absorbed the damage. Britain collected the profits. This was not commerce, it was coercion. A narcotic economy built on suffering. Entire societies destabilized for profit. All orchestrated by a corporation. The scale was global. The intent was domination. By the 1800s, the company ruled more territory than the British Crown. It wasn't a nation, but it behaved like one. It printed currency, ran its own courts, strengthened its private army, collected taxes from millions, dictated trade routes, controlled agriculture, set prices, removed rulers, installed puppets, and answered to no one except shareholders. There was no democracy, no accountability, no justice, only revenue. Villagers lived under corporate rule, their lives governed by profit margins. The company was a new kind of empire. Corporate colonization, decades before the term existed. And India was its laboratory. Oppression never lasts unchallenged. Across villages and towns, anger grew. The sepoys, once loyal, began questioning their service. Taxes crushed farmers, monopolies destroyed artisans. Religious tensions were provoked through careless policies. Rumors spread like wildfire, meetings became secret. Leaders emerged quietly. The company sensed the shift, but misread its magnitude. They treated rebellion as inconvenience. But rebellion was becoming inevitable. The spark was about to ignite. And once lit, it would roar across the landscape. India was changing. The people were awakening. The company's arrogance blinded it. Their empire was built on fear, but fear was fading, and resistance was rising. The revolt began with sepoys refusing orders. It spread faster than the company imagined. From barracks to villages, from towns to forts, from whispers to full-scale rebellion, cities rose in defiance. Leaders like Rani Lakshmibai and Bahadur Shah Zafar emerged. The company panicked. Their empire of profit was suddenly at risk. The revolt wasn't perfectly coordinated, but it was powerful and emotional. It shook the company's confidence. It disrupted its revenue machine. It exposed the instability behind its facade. The retaliation was brutal. Villages were burned. Thousands executed. The rebellion failed militarily, but it shattered the illusion of British control. The company's days were numbered. After the revolt, the British government intervened. The East India Company was dissolved. But India was not freed. Rule simply changed hands. Corporate empire became imperial empire. Queen Victoria became the Empress of India. The Crown assumed direct control. Administrative systems expanded. Railways were built, not for Indians, but for resource extraction. Taxes remained high. Wealth continued flowing to London. Education policies restricted Indian potential. Agricultural practices enforced dependency. Industries that could threaten Britain were dismantled. The structure of exploitation stayed intact. Only the managers changed. India remained a colony, only with a royal seal. The drain never stopped. It simply became more organized. Empire had taken a new shape. In the late 19th century, the drain became scientific. Economists calculated how much wealth could be extracted annually. Taxes were adjusted to maximize British revenue. Indian exports were priced low, British imports priced high. Railways moved raw materials outward. Ships brought back finished British goods. India paid for both directions. Britain profited from both directions. Indian industries collapsed. British factories thrived. Famines increased in frequency and death toll. Agriculture became unstable. Savings evaporated. Wealth concentration became extreme. Britain claimed India was poor, but poverty was manufactured. The system was perfect. For Britain, it was fatal. For India. And the world pretended this was civilization. It was economic suffocation. Modern economists finally calculated the total drain. The figure is staggering: $45 trillion. Not inflation-adjusted, real modern value. Wealth transferred directly from India to Britain. Money extracted through taxes, trade manipulation, and monopolies. Enough wealth to build the entire British Empire. Enough to reshape global power forever. This wasn't a coincidence. It was by design. India didn't become poor naturally. It was impoverished intentionally. Prosperity was siphoned across oceans and recorded as economic growth in Britain. The world applauded Britain's rise, but ignored India's fall. Empire is not built on innovation alone. It is built on extraction. And this extraction was mathematical, cold, precise. Economic extraction was only half the project. Cultural domination was the other half. Indian languages were devalued. English became the gateway to opportunity. Traditional crafts were dismissed as inferior. Indian science was mocked, suppressed, or stolen. British narratives replaced Indian history. Generations grew up believing colonization modernized India. But modernization without autonomy is manipulation. Cultural confidence was weakened intentionally. Systems of knowledge were disrupted. Education was redesigned to create loyal subjects. The goal wasn't enlightenment, it was obedience. A nation controlled economically must also be controlled mentally. This was colonization of the mind. Subtler than war, more effective than violence, and longer lasting. Late British rule saw repeated famines. Millions starved, not due to nature, but due to policies that valued revenue over life. Food was exported while Indians starved. Relief was denied to avoid market disruption. Officials blamed the victims. Prices were kept high intentionally. Railways moved grain to ports, not starving villages. The Great Famine of 1876 to 1878 killed up to 10 million. The 1899 famine killed millions more. India became the world's famine capital. But famine wasn't accidental. It was a predictable outcome of extraction. A nation deprived of its own wealth cannot survive crisis. Britain called this unfortunate. But it was systematic, deliberate, profitable, and devastating. Famines were not failures. They were features of empire. India had thriving industries before colonization. British rule systematically dismantled them. Indian shipbuilding was banned, steel production suppressed, crafts taxed heavily, handmade textiles destroyed by machine-made imports. Weavers were pushed to starvation. In some legends, looms were cut to enforce dependency. Whether symbolic or literal, the destruction was real. India was forced into raw material production. Britain became the manufacturer of the world. The Industrial Revolution was fed by Indian wealth. Indian decline funded British rise. This wasn't progress, it was sabotage. Innovation for one nation, regression for another. A global hierarchy built intentionally. India's economy was redesigned to serve foreign masters, and the effects lasted long after independence. Economic wounds carved across generations. By the early 20th century, Indians had understood the system. They saw British rule not as governance, but exploitation. Leaders like Gandhi, Tilak, Bose, and Nehru emerged. Movements rose demanding autonomy. Students protested, workers struck, farmers rebelled. The empire felt pressure from all sides, yet British extraction continued relentlessly. World War I drained India further. World War II drained it even more. Famine struck Bengal again in 1943. Millions died while Britain hoarded food for the war. The moral facade of the empire collapsed. Global opinion shifted. Britain realized the cost of holding India was rising, the financial gain shrinking, the revolt unstoppable. Empire had become a burden, and the end was approaching. In 1947, India finally gained independence. But freedom came with a shattered economy. Industries destroyed, agriculture destabilized, education restricted. Infrastructure designed for extraction, not development. Wealth transferred out for 200 years. GDP reduced to under 3% of global output. A superpower reduced to a struggling nation. Britain left without reparations, without apology, without acknowledging the trillions taken. India began rebuilding from ruins. The cost of empire was carried by the colonized, not the colonizer. Independence ended the rule, but not the consequences. Economic scars remained deep, and the world rarely discusses the truth, because the truth is uncomfortable. The British Empire officially ended, but its structures survived. Extraction became globalization, control became development assistance, dependency became foreign investment, financial leverage replaced military force. The world's richest nations still shape the poorest. Through loans, trade rules, and corporate power. The system did not die in 1947. It evolved. The same mechanisms of extraction reappear in modern forms. Debt traps, resource contracts, supply chain dominance, currency manipulation, institutional influence. The empire simply went invisible, but its logic remains unchanged. The question is not whether colonization ended, but who controls the world now and how.